Hi, welcome back to our philosophy of happiness class. So today, in this lecture, let's talk about Daoism. So I'll firstly talk about some general features of Daoism and Laozi's work. Then I'll also talk about Zhuangzi's work. Again, the two very classic philosophers of Daoism. So the most important concepts in Taoism or Daoism are probably the idea of Wu Wei and the idea of the Wei. So I linked a very good video that explained the concept of Wu Wei or non-action really well. And also I think it does it in a very interesting way. So please check that out. And also the concept of the Wei. As you heard in the Confucianism lecture, this term, the Wei, is also used a lot in Confucian philosophies. So some people might ask, are the Confucian way and the Daoism way the same, or are they different? So I think it depends on different interpretations you have of the two teachings. It also depends on the specific academic standpoints you hold about these theories. So I think different philosophers and scholars will disagree upon this. So I'll just talk about my personal opinion or understanding. A lot of you might disagree with me, so I'm really curious to hear about what you think. So let me know more in the discussion space. So my personal understanding is that the Daoism way and the Confucian way, I think they coincide in a lot of ways. So for instance, I think they both talk about or refer to a kind of metaphysical, foundational, ultimate form of wisdom. This ultimate understanding of how the universe works, about the laws of the universe. This metaphysical and foundational truth and understanding of that truth. So I think they both kind of refer to something like that. And I think the Confucian way and the Taoist way both are action guiding principles for the Taoists and the Confucianists. So the Tao for both doctrines contains some kinds of morals or principles of action and guidance. And I think both of them associate understanding of the Tao with being a sage and with virtue and wisdom. So I think for both Taoists and Confucianists, if you understand the Tao and if you can live according to the Tao, then you are virtuous, then you are happy, you are wise, and you are a sage. So I think, and you would be free, and you will live a life of well-being. So, and you will live a life of meaning, or you will live a good life. So I think both of them would say that. But I think they differ in some ways as well. So some people might disagree with this, but I think if you look at the overall theoretical pictures of Daoism and Confucianism, you might realize that, okay, so they are looking at ideal persons, but the ideal person would look different for them. So for Confucianists, an ideal person just engages in their relations with the world, with other people in a virtuous way. They cultivate their virtues and probably participate in the society, participate in the world. They probably try to influence others with their wisdom and virtues, and they try to deal with their connections with the world. So, for instance, their family and friends, and probably their emperors and political authorities in virtuous ways. and they are in the right positions in the world, and they engage in the obligations, rituals, so on and so forth. So that's an ideal person in the Confucianist eyes. But for Taoists, an ideal person for them would look different, right? So an ideal person for Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi probably is someone who lives in the non-action, someone who is one with the universe. For Lao Tzu, probably is someone who just lives with minimum material needs and focuses on their own serenity, the wu wei, the non-action in their heart. For Zhuangzi is someone who has skepticism about the conventions we have in this world. So if you look at the ideal person's pictures, the different pictures of ideal persons in both theories and doctrines, you will realize that probably the actual content of the way, the actual teachings of the way would be different for both groups. So I think because of the different theoretical purposes both doctrines have, what's actually involved in the way probably are different for both of them. So that's how I feel about this question. But a lot of you might disagree, so I would love to have more discussions about this. And what is the way for Taoists? I think it's an ultimate truth and wisdom that can't be named or defined, and the contents of it can't be told. So here I cited a passage from the chapter 1 of the Daoism. So it just says directly, explicitly, that the way cannot be spoken of and it cannot be named. So it's kind of nameless, and you can't actually define it, or if you can't actually say it, you can't actually explicitly kind of reduce it to a set of statements telling us what it is. If you are doing that, then maybe you haven't gotten the way. So I think that's what Lao Tzu is saying, that the way is really not something you can communicate through language. If you are doing that, then maybe what you're communicating isn't actually the way. It's something that you have to understand through probably living in non-action, living in those kind of modes that Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi talked about. By becoming a sage, you can only understand it through being a sage and living in that sagehood, but not by reading a bunch of sentences or trying to use language to capture it. So that's basically what the Dao is. I know it's kind of confusing, right? So I guess a lot of people find it hard to understand what Daoism is. So I linked other videos for this purpose, so you might have a better grasp of it after reading it. So if you're interested, I also highly recommend reading Daoism as well. You can search for it online, and it's very easy to find the text. If you can't find it, or if you are reading it but are having problems with it, so also feel free to talk to me about it. So let's look at the specific teachings of Lao Tzu. So firstly, in the Daoism, Lao Tzu tried to propose a specific social and political order that looks like this. So as you can probably see in the social and political order Lao Tzu proposes, he tries to urge a degree of ignorance that he tries. For instance, he argues that people should be illiterate. And some people also interpret Lao Tzu as promoting some a theory of pacifism. And Lao Tzu argues that there are two types of desires. So one is natural desire, for instance, hunger or thirsty, or if you need a warm house, you need to keep warm and stuff like that, as well as acquire desires. For instance, I have desire for luxury, I have desire to buy the newest iPhone, or I have desires to buy a very shiny necklace, stuff like that. And in some of the Daoism work, they had the saying of that acquired desires make oneself a servant and harms one's well-being. So they think that we should only satisfy our natural desires and try to give up and avoid the acquired desires. We should try to just realize that we have those acquired desires and stop having them. And following this kind of reasoning, so Lao Tzu proposes this agrarian utopia where just people living in it kind of satisfy their natural desires. So they their hunger and thirst and stuff are satisfied, but they are only gave the minimum material for them to satisfy their natural desires, or in other words, the people living in it only desire minimum, which satisfy their most natural needs, and that's it. So people wouldn't for instance, I might be hungry, right? But so I only desire for what can feed me, but I don't desire for a food of great taste, or if I ate an apple and that was enough to satisfy my hunger, then I shouldn't desire for a whole steak, or I shouldn't desire for a cake and stuff like that. So people only desire the kind of the minimum for themselves, and they don't try to desire a lot more than that. And people kind of live in ways that they only focus on their natural desires, and they focus on their inner worlds, and they engage in non-action. So they live in wu-wei ways. They live within that idea of the space of non-action. So that's a kind of social and political social and political order and structure Lao Tzu is proposing. And as you can see, for Lao Tzu, a person who lives with well-being, a person who lives happily, a happy person would look like someone who has the sagehood of understanding the way. So a happy person would be someone who can understand and live according to the way, and probably influencing others with the correct understanding. But probably the influencing here we're talking about is not quite like the Confucian influencing. It's more like you live in that space of wu-wei and non-action, and other people see you, and they so it's more like a kind of metaphysical or kinds of influencing. So we're kind of mystic kinds of influencing. So it's not quite like social influencing. And so a happy person would be someone who understands and lives according to the way, and lives in this agrarian utopia, lives in that social and political disorder, social and political order, 老子 promotes, and also someone who kind of engages in this journey of trying to understand the way, trying to understand the Tao, is someone who tries to kind of get rid of their acquired desires and only satisfy their natural desires, and so they are not impacted or haunted by their acquired desires. And it will be someone who who lives in that space of non-action, who lives effortlessly, is someone who, through engaging in the journey of understanding the Tao and giving up the acquired desires, finally achieves this state of peace and wisdom, and someone who is completely one with the universe and with probably all the living beings in the world, someone who finally becomes a part of the wholeness of one, and kind of lives with that kind of wisdom and serenity of the one. So basically it's a picture like this, quite different from the Confucian picture, right? So for Zhuangzi, a very central theoretical idea for him was the distinction between the human perspective and the heaven perspective. So when we looked at things from this human perspective, we are pretty epistemically confident about a lot of things. We make distinctions, we make conclusions that are pretty sound. We are absolute about a lot of things. But then if we look at those things from a heaven perspective, then maybe we would be more skeptic. So I'll explain this with an example. So as a human, I can pretty confidently say that there is an apple on the table. But from the heaven perspective, I can't confirm that I'm not dreaming or I'm not delusional, or maybe I'm a brain in some kind of machine or whatever. So Zhuangzi argues that what we conclude as humans depend a lot on one, the cultures and societies we live in, and the pre-existing theoretical framework and structures we have, and two, our physiological and psychological structures, so how our physiology and psychology works, and three, how our sensibilities work, and probably four, a lot of pre-existing assumptions we already have about the world. Some of them are social, some of them are epistemic, some of them are personal. So Zhuangzi argues that, the human perspective depends on a lot of these things. But what if we jump out of those? What if we look at it from a perspective of skepticism? A lot of what we were pretty sure about would change a lot. So there was this famous passage in Zhuangzi where one person made the conclusions about the fish being sad. They think the fish was living a bad life, and Zhuangzi argued that, okay, you are not the fish, then how do you know how the fish feels? So I feel like Zhuangzi here is also trying to go beyond the human perspective. That is, we as humans make a lot of conclusions about things and about other beings as well, but a lot of that come from how we feel, and how we feel are fully determined by our physiological structures, by how our brains work, by how our sensibilities work, by the limits and bounds of our sensations. That would change if we were all of a sudden liberated from all of these. So maybe as a human, I feel sad and I feel certain emotions. If I live in a different body, or if I live in a being with a different kinds of physiological or psychological structure, then maybe my conclusion about that thing would be different. Or maybe as a human, my piano competition tomorrow is very important for me. It means a lot to me. But if I jump out of these assumptions that it's important to be successful in piano competitions, maybe I'll have a different conclusion about that. Or maybe I can even start to be skeptic about the concept of success and what does it mean to be successful? Who told me that doing this would make me successful? Maybe it's some kinds of societal agreements that what success should look like, what kind of things should be valued. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's dependent on some how humans think or our brains work, but maybe that's not the ultimate perspective. So I've tried to come up with several examples by Zhuangzi. He is basically trying to emphasize that the human perspective isn't the ultimate perspective. Therefore, our conclusions about the world are not ultimate conclusions about the world, and maybe others' conclusions about us, even if they seem right from the human perspective, is not the ultimate conclusion about us. So Zhuangzi urges us and encourages us to realize that some conclusions we have are merely from the human perspective, and he encourages us to see that a lot of conventions we have, a lot of assumptions we have, they're not ultimate truth. So we need to be skeptic about them. So here comes from Zhuangzi's idea of philosophical double vision. So he thinks that we need to see from both the human perspective as well as the heaven perspective. So we look at our everyday lives and the conventions and assumptions with this with skepticism, with heaven perspective, realizing that okay, a lot of these maybe are relative, maybe they're not the ultimate truth. And maybe if I change the perspective, they can be wrong, or maybe they can mean less. But we also do not give up the human perspective, because we still have to live in this world, and we still have to maybe try to stay alive and have a fulfilling life. So if we maintained the human perspective, we can still give things meaning. We can still give things more tangible meaning, and we can still make tangible connections regarding this world, so we can still live in this world, actually live in this world. So both perspectives are pretty necessary. So Zhuangzi is not saying that, okay, whatever, give up the human perspective now and just live in the heaven perspective. He's not saying that. Zhuangzi urges us to maintain both perspectives and try to see from both sides and try to blend them together in a balanced way. So I think that's what Zhuangzi is saying. And if we try to look at things from heaven perspective, how would that look like? So a lot of people might say, okay, that sounds nice, but how do I do that? What kind of life suggestions can that generate for me? So I think Zhuangzi thinks that we can start becoming a skeptic about certain concepts like death and success and time. So in terms of death, so to Zhuangzi, he probably thinks that, okay, our notions of life and death are very limited by our epistemology, but how do we know that life isn't an illusion? How do we know that death isn't an illusion? And also in terms of success, maybe our understandings of success highly dependent on the conventions we had, maybe highly dependent on what my parents told me, but maybe my parents are wrong, maybe the conventions are wrong, maybe we still have to live according to them, but at least we can stop attacking ourselves, because those things, maybe they are themselves things that are not fully justified, they are themselves things we should be skeptic about. So for instance, maybe if I only adopted the human perspective and I failed my piano competition tomorrow, I would think, okay, I'm an ultimate piece of rubbish and I can't do this well. And that gives an ultimate truth about me, that says something ultimate about me. Zhuangzi is saying that, or maybe epistemically I can challenge that, but in terms of my feeling, I might not be able to feel that. Zhuangzi, if he saw me like that, he would probably encourage me to be more skeptic about this belief that this piano competition means so much, this convention of winning means so much, this convention of making others happy means so much. At the end of the day, to Zhuangzi, maybe death and life, all these illusory experiences of being a human and the very idea of time are probably illusory as well. Then why did this piano competition mean so much? Well, of course, it still means something important to me, as I still have to live in this world. I still have to pursue certain projects related to piano so that I can't completely give this up. But I think Zhuangzi would tell me that if you looked at these with skepticism, you would realize that at least you shouldn't think that they make something, they're making ultimate conclusions about me. At least you shouldn't attack yourself as if this has ultimately rejected me. At least I shouldn't let that tell me in this sure, 100% sure and unchangeable way, determined way, that this says something about my reality. So I think, I don't know if that explanation was kind of long-winded, but I think what Zhuangzi is saying here is that if something is painful for us, or if something is hurting us a lot, or if some of our reality is making us suffer a lot, at least do not attack ourselves as if those things can tell us what we are like. So to Zhuangzi, at the end of the day, a lot of these are really relative. So there's that. Well, Zhuangzi would even say that, okay, even some of the most absolute truths we have as humans can really be challenged. So, for instance, if we can live 1,000 years, then 10 years wouldn't matter, right? We would think 10 years are pretty fast. If something takes about 5 years to form, it would be a lot for us as humans right now. But if our lifespans were 1,000 years, we wouldn't worry about 5 years, right? That would be pretty fast for us, right? Or if we are humans that can move 100 kilometers an hour, if we can run that fast, then our understanding of time and our experience, a lot of things right now would change, right? Or if I am someone who's with completely different sensibilities, then we wouldn't worry about a lot of things right now. So Zhuangzi is saying that what we are concluding now is so limited to by our sensation accessibilities, but why should we think that tells me something ultimate about who I am? So he tries to challenge all of those ideas that kind of gave us pain. So okay, so now I'm adopting philosophical double vision. How should I live, and what would my life look like? So my understanding of this is more like a person who lives in philosophical double vision would be in the moment that we live there, and we will live right in the moment. But we also see the bigger picture, that we don't attribute so much meaning to the things that hurt us or make us suffer. So if something gives me a lot of anxiety or stress, then maybe one practice I can do is to jump out of that and challenge the thing that gives me a lot of anxiety and stress. So personally, this reminds me of CBT as well. So it's a psychological technique. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. So I think Zhuangzi thinks that if we could adopt all of this, we would be free from anxiety, and we would more belong to the unified wholes, because we are not so stuck in the human perspective anymore. We can see things more from the unified whole, and that would make us closer to that unified whole. And he also thinks that this is necessary condition for optimal performances. So maybe I would go to that piano competition. I would still care about the conventions of playing pianos, and I try my best to play. But I stay skeptic about the idea of success, and I try to not be so concerned with success, and I try to realize that a lot of this is so dependent on things that are temporary. So I try to not to care about so much. I just focus on doing the things themselves, and I stop worrying about success, and I stop worrying about how well I actually played. So Zhuangzi thinks a state like that is someone who sees from both perspectives. And Zhuangzi thinks that unless you are in that state, I think it's a bit like the flow state as well. So Zhuangzi thinks that only if you are someone in that state, you can have the best performance in terms of different skills or projects. So that's actually quite relevant to our life as well. And I guess a lot of us might have had experiences of that kind of states, and probably had very unique experiences about that. So if you had experiences that really resonated with what Zhuangzi talk about, so let me know more in the reflection journal. I would love to have discussion about this. And ultimately, Zhuangzi thinks that we should apply skepticism to the conception of well-being itself, because our conception of well-being right now is so dependent on a lot of things we have. Well, we may not be able to change our physiological structures and so on and so forth, but there are a lot of things we can change or challenge. So I think he urges us to look at the conception of well-being again and happiness again, and try to explore, try to navigate, try to ask a lot of skeptical questions, try to jump out of the things that we thought were absolute, and try to reinterpret our reality, try to ask new questions about our reality and see where that leads us, and practice this art of adopting philosophical double visions, and practice this art of not being too stuck in one perspective, that we are not too detached from reality, that we don't care about any human conventions anymore. We are also not too haunted by the human conventions we have, and we don't let them determine who we are ultimately. So I think that's what Zhuangzi is suggesting here. And personally, I found that very, very helpful. And I think, so this is my last message. I think a lot of Daoism is pretty hard to understand and interpret, especially from an analytical philosophy way. So the chapter was engaging in, the textbook chapter was engaging in both texts, still in pretty analytical ways. So if you are interested in some of these ideas, I really would like to encourage you to read more. So, and you can read the translations of Zhuangzi, read the translations of Dao De Jing. I think that would be very enriching, and I personally benefited a lot from those texts, and I think the same for Buddhism. So I tried to give a lecture regarding these three great doctrines of wisdom, but really each of them can itself be a whole semester's class, or even several semesters classes. So I guess what I wanted to do here is to give you some starting points and see if some of these ideas resonated with you, so you can start from there and work forward and try to explore and navigate these questions on your own. Or if you would like to discuss some of these, or if you would like to read more, you can always write me an email and we can talk about it. I can find materials for you to read. We can read something together, stuff like that. So yeah, so that's it for this lecture. Thank you so much, and see you in the Buddhism lecture.